Hi guys, so today we will have the honor to host David Kirsh. He is currently a professor and past department chair at the University of California in San Diego, where he heads the Interactive Cognition Lab. He received his BA from the University of Toronto and his PhD in Philosophy and Cognitive Science from Oxford University. Prior to arriving at the University of California in San Diego, he spent 5 years as a research scientist in the Artificial Intelligence Lab at the MIT. He is the author of many articles on situated and distributed cognition, on creativity, on interactivity, and he maintains a broad interest in many fields beyond cognitive science. He is currently the president of the Academy of Neuroscience for Architecture and was co-director of the Arthur C. Clarke Center of Human Imagination. Welcome, David.
Hello, Natalie. Naturally, it is a singular pleasure seeing you.
I know that you have worked largely on creativity, both with Wayne McGregor and Bartlett in the Generative Computational Group. Can you say a bit about what you learned that might be helpful for architects and other creatives?
I was interested in creativity for a long time, as many people are. I had the great opportunity of working with the choreographer of the Royal Ballet and his private company called Random Dance, Wayne McGregor. And we worked together for 6 or 7 years. He was kind enough to say we collaborated, but I personally would say that's an exaggeration. However, we did have conversations every day for many, many years, and I learned something about choreography then. Uh, what I found that is of general value is that creativity can be generated by certain tricks and techniques. I won't call them tricks because they're methods that people are using. For instance, in math, if one is solving a problem in geometry, you try often to re-represent the problem you transform it into another representational system such as algebra, and some of the things that are easy in algebra are hard in geometry, and some of the things that are easy in geometry are hard in algebra. So if you can make a translation, you can sometimes answer some hard things that otherwise would be difficult in just the one representational system. So that general idea I find recurring place after place when people are trying to be stepping outside of the ordinary. And so in the case of Wayne, he would sometimes, for instance, generate a movement, or he would have his dancers solve a choreographic problem, which I'll talk about in a minute. And then he might ask another dancer to run it through their body. They have a different body. Some of them are tall and thin, others of them are much shorter and a little wider, and each body has its own peculiar method of movement. And so sometimes he'd like the appearance of a phrase in one body more than another body, and then he might send it back to another body.
Okay.
Sometimes he would change the music. So he might have them work out on a choreographic problem with one set of music and work on it for a while, and then he might just change it from very contemporary music to classical music. And the tonality and the rhythmic structures of the classical music could affect how they then sort of create a mood for their music, for their dance. Now, in generative design, moving on to architecture, I mean, there are many other examples, but in generative design, the same idea of using and mapping between representational systems really can be exploited because, suppose rather than building, solving the problem of a building and then say, oh, and it needs a roof of the following specification, where you already have the structure of the building, the footprint of the building, or you say it needs to satisfy this heat signature. What happens if you took the cubic volume of the building as a constraint, and then you used the heat signature of the building as the thing that you used to generate designs? So now you're doing it backward. It's going to generate crazy, wild designs, all that are satisfying the cubic foot and different heat signatures. And I've seen this happen, and it runs through bizarre designs, none of which you would have thought of, all of which satisfy both heat and footprint or heat and cubic space. So that's a way of coming out with possibilities. It's a kind of AI way, not the standard way, but it's an AI way. And in a way, what you can look at some of these things are, that's the mapping between different representations, but you can also find creativity coming up through chance and creating, exploiting chance a lot. So a standard way that Wayne had of creating dance movement that would be novel, because he was very oriented in having new movements, new dance phrases that people had never seen before, or even movements that people had never seen before. And one of the ways of doing that, very standard in choreography, is to choose some random points in the room. And so you might say, oh, there's a little line there where the cabinets come together, or the faucet has a curve there, and then it has the handle. So you see that is a little thing. I'm looking at a faucet over there. And now I map the faucet or parts of the faucet onto different parts of my body. And I might duplicate the faucet with my shoulder. Now that's pretty easy. So a dancer wouldn't use something as simple as a shoulder, but you could use this part and you could use other parts, and you have lots of these things throughout. And the result is that you come up with a bizarre looking dance phrase. So in fact, I have a video, if you give me a second to find it.
That would be great.
I can show you a video. Okay. Now, this is a dancer from Bill Forsyth's group, Noah. And what you can see that the exercise that Bill would have given them was to use furniture from a banquet hall, and they're supposed to do something with it. So here he's imagining he's interacting with all these pieces of furniture, and we have put on top this actually came from them. They put on top the idea of the images that he was working with. Now, it makes sense when you see him acting in response to the images, but if you didn't see the images, he's just doing a lot of weird stuff. And of course, it's interesting and novel. So what he's really doing there is both projecting visual imagery, and he has that in mind, and he's working with it, but he also has kinesthetic imagery, like what it would feel like to break through the chair or to collapse something. And so that imagery, he's projecting onto his body, and he's executing it there. So this is a completely different way. You can see how generative this process is. You go from one environment to another environment, and you tell them to use different things, found objects, and so they can generate new movements that way. This is a very general idea. Now you say, well, how does that apply to architecture? That's a little harder. That's a little harder. But I think that there are ways in which it can apply to architecture. And for instance, one thing that the Bauhaus did, and which greatly impressed me at the Bauhaus Museum in Berlin, was they undertook studies. Now, in a study, you go deep into something. So, for instance, you're making a kettle, and you might decide that the kettle should be a sphere. Well, then you have all the different ways that you can incorporate a sphere or multiple spheres in a kettle, and you just have study after study after study. And that's what they did. So in architecture, if somebody has a particular region, a building they have to work with, they can define it in a certain way and then engage in a study. And maybe they can use chance to say, well, suppose I am restricted in the resources I have. That would be like a constraint, not exactly chance. That's a standard way of generating creativity. You haven't got as much, so use what little you have to create something new. I wouldn't like to pretend to give methods for creativity. There are lots in architecture, but chance, interaction, studies, constraints, all sorts of things are ways that can be used.
What should architects learn about humans and their environment from cognitive science?
Um, well, this is an interesting and timely question for me because I was just at a 2-week meeting, as were you, of architects and scientists. And as I listened to the things that both teams were saying, I realized that all the formalisms and methods of analyzing human behavior that I've been concerned with might actually form, and others, certainly not saying that I'm the only one concerned with that at all, but I'm concerned with analyzing how people move in Starbucks or Pete's as baristas in the back space, and how should we understand the environment that they're operating in, and how do the two activity spaces of one barista and another barista lay on top of each other as they are engaging in what is often really looks like a choreography of movement between each other in a tight space. And so to analyze that, I use concepts like an activity space or an affordance landscape. And from the classic theory of problem solving of Newell and Simon, we have the idea of a task environment. And a task environment is like in chess. The task environment is the space of possible moves, and what happens if you make those moves. And then people have an inner representation to some degree of those possible moves, and the task space is bigger than their individual representation of it. And so they have to cope with that by heuristics or other techniques. But the idea of a task environment is it's super helpful in all sorts of ways. And so when I think of the space that people are moving through, if you actually track people in the course of a day inside their workplace, you'd say, well, what space are they in? Is it really a geometric space? Well, if they sat down and played chess, no, they're in the chess space. If they're talking to each other, they're in a discourse space where their attention is directed at topic and focus, and they're making moves in a rhetorical space that they co-create. They co-construct this space. It's a space of joint activity. And these are the spaces they're really in. That's where their attention is focused. And that's what they're thinking about. That's where their objects of thought are. So if they move to their desk, then they open up a task. That's where they are. Or in a group discussion or in a group meeting. That's where they are inside that space. Or they navigate through a space. And then they're looking for hints of legibility. None of this is just reducible to geometric space. So I think, and again, I have a slide I can show you that sort of captures this idea. And let me do that. Here, the idea is that we as scientists are zooming in and zooming out many levels of explanation and many levels of analysis to understand very specific things. I mean, at the highest level, we're concerned with history and cultural context. So we could analyze the cultural context of a building, which would be quite different than analyzing the structure just per se, or the engineering elements of a building. But once you start poking deep inside, you come across these activity landscapes. You have, for sure, the geometric space, but it's not just geometric space. It's always geometric space as is being exploited and used by people. So if they're navigating, they're engaging the geometric space, but the legibility of the geometric space, that means the space is filled with attributes. Attributes to some degree are invisible. And so they're not invisible when you tune to them or you recognize them, but they could be in very specific spots, or they could be in a more general way. You can't say, like, are they to 1,000th of an inch? Where's an attribute? So it's a little hard to think in terms of geometric space. And then you have these task environments. and then peripersonal space, which is, of course, the space close to one's body within the perimeter of reach or kicking. That peripersonal space. Imagine you're eating lunch. Your focus is on the things within reach. That's your peripersonal space.
Yeah.
Anyway, you get the idea. And why aren't these environments as real as more geometric spaces? So I think this might have legs, maybe it won't, but I think it could be a very interesting topic to properly explore.
Okay, can we go back to the normal screen?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, but I have another question for you.
Sure.
Are you writing any article or book related to neuroscience applied in architecture, or really close?
Neuroscientist, but well, this stuff I think is very provocative, and so I would like to pursue the idea of this certainly in a technical article first, and then I think there are a number of areas that so it's still early for science to come in and talk well to architecture, but I think it's getting closer to the point where we can. And if we're practical enough, keep asking, well, how does this help an architect really? Tell me exactly. How are they going to do something different in light of all this stuff we're talking about? So if we can focus on questions like that, I think that we can get some advance, and maybe in more discussions there will be enough topics that would make a nice book, and I think
Yes.
I'd like to work in that area.
So the
Yeah.
answer is yes. Okay, that's
Well,
really good to know.
you know.
Okay, so let's go to the third question. It says that you have been a visiting professor at many great universities like MIT, Stanford, and UCL, to name a few. So the surprising thing to me is that the faculties are so different. Okay,
Yeah.
they include computer science, human-computer interaction, architecture, choreography, and dance. And now I see music soon at Stanford. Why do you want to connect with so many departments?
Well, one of the things really is that it's like this. Isaiah Berlin, the great historian of thought last century, wrote a book he called The Hedgehog and the Fox. The hedgehog knows one thing, buries very deeply, and he knows that thing very deeply, doesn't dart around.
Mhm.
The fox darts. The fox knows many things, not as deeply as a hedgehog, but he or she knows many things, sort of like a bee pursuing connections and opportunity. It's clear to me that I'm more a fox than a hedgehog. And I would like, but when you learn a new field, you have to master a discourse field, their technical language. Otherwise, you get no respect. So part of the point of being in a department is to have conversations, and then you ask people, well, this and that, and you push at it, and then you begin to understand how they think, because every discipline thinks differently. So you have to get inside it. And then when you're inside it, you're in a better position to think more macroscopically, more as a sort of interdisciplinary thinking. And so that's what I love. I love that, and it's always very exciting, and people are super nice, and it's just fun to move around. So that's
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 actually going to integrate all your knowledge in what you are doing next. I mean, it allows you also to understand better the others, no? To have some empathy.
yes. Well, yes, well, or for instance, if one is interested in science or neuroscience or cognitive science for architecture, it's helpful to know what architectures really do. So I know what generative computation is about or generative design is about. Uh, I know what some of the problems are that designers are facing, and so that makes it possible for me not to have the designer there in the room, but to say, well, how would this make a difference to how they do work? And so it's a help, of because I'm not like any of them really who do it for a living. So you do have to have the conversation, but it's the first step. So it's helpful in that way. And I think every one of them. So for instance, from musicians and composers and stuff, they think about the world of sound and acoustics differently. And so you want to at least get deeply enough into the world of sound and acoustics to begin to transfer some of their ideas of acoustic space into architectural space. And I think that's a great opportunity. And certainly it's going to be super important for the metaverse. And everybody knows that, I think, by now, that the metaverse without sound is, I mean, like dinner without salt, or, dinner without taste, or dinner without appearance.
You have a particular take on the role of an activism that seems to me worth discussing by designers. Could you explain your view, please?
An activism is huge, and there are many people working in different areas of an activism. If you ask me, I think the heart of an activism is about how we co-create the world. So there are constraints out there. No one, I don't think, in activists are trying to deny that there is an external world that is hard. And so the external world provides a collection of constraints on what, for instance, you could perceive, or well, actually not quite, but yeah, there are constraints on that, and there are constraints then that also come from the person. And so we have a lot of interests, and we project things all the time, like adding stuff to the world. So it's a kind of co-creation of the world we live in. You and I don't live in the same world. We live in a very similar world, but if we were in the same room, you would see things in the room that I don't notice, and I would notice things you don't notice, and we just act differently in the room because of our interests and what we see. So the inactive, that's the general view of an activism, it seems to me. And then when you ask as a theory of perception, the core idea, I think, of an activism there can be reduced to two major, I mean, there are more, but two big ones, really, that says that we both perceive much less than is in front of us. And there's all the cases of attention blindness or change blindness, or the fact that you attend to things and I don't attend to things. So that's the fact that there's much more out there that we could see, but we don't see. Time is short. And the other thing is that we're constantly adding to the outside that we don't actually see. So you fill in things that are occluded, you might be wrong. Or in the case of my favorite example, and Dan Dennett's too, I think there's the Wall of Marilyns by Andy Warhol, which has, I don't know, maybe 20 Marilyns there. And they're all boxes of Marilyn's face. And when you look at it, you see that you have all those Marilyns up there. But in fact, you never look at them all. And if somebody snuck in a Jane Mansfield or some other woman who is blonde and sort of looks like Marilyn, you wouldn't notice the difference. You might, but there's many cases where you certainly wouldn't, because you're not actually checking everyone to see that it's a Marilyn. So, but you see the wall as all Marilyns. But you didn't see all the wall as all Marilyns. You think you saw the wall as all Marilyns. So you're seeing more than is there. And that's just what we do in life. So,
We assume,
please?
would you say that we assume things and we think we are seeing,
Yes.
but actually we are not, and there is no
Yeah.
such thing as free will too? What do you think?
I didn't say there's no such thing as free will. I just said that
I
you
say
see
that.
things that, no, oh, what did you say? Excuse me.
I say that.
Oh, you say that there is no such thing as free will. Oh, well, I
That's
don't want to,
that's another topic, right? Okay.
I don't want to go to free will. But anyway, let me just sort of say a tiny bit of this, of the idea that, we see our life through the lens of multiple environments that I was talking about before. And so we enter an environment, we leave an environment, we superpose one environment on top of another. That's an activism. And if we're tending to things that aren't visible all the time, we're kind of, occupying a space that we're co-creating. So I'm not saying we're perceiving everything that we have as objects of thought, but they are very real elements in our world, such as a chess move. And architecture is just one big frame way out there that affects what we perceive and think. But there are many more that I'm talking about, these environments, and architects need to think about how people move through these spheres of attention.
Would you recommend anything? I mean, I think an activism is a little bit difficult to understand, and I was talking to you about the coping mechanism and that we are intertwined with the environment, and you were explaining me this, and this is about
Yeah.
Varela and Maturana from the 91. But my question is, there is any book? I have another question for you, and this is one of my favorite questions, by the way. So, what do you think of the phrase attunement to atmospheres? Is there a place for this sort of humanistic language in a scientific approach to architecture? I'm not going to talk about Stimmung for sure.
Mhm. As you perfectly know, Stimmung drives me nuts. I'm not denying it. I just say it drives me nuts. And the same with not quite as badly, but the same with the terms attunement and atmosphere. They're wonderful terms, and people evoke them so much. But the trouble is, as far as I can tell, no one can define them in any reasonable way. It's sort of like saying, "Oh, well, I know it when I see it." And so I asked over 10 people at this recent workshop, what is atmosphere? And I even asked people to look it up and try to find an answer to it. And the answers were all over the place, completely appalling, and none were specific. I got 10 completely different answers. So, it's a little bit of a challenge when we're all going to talk about atmosphere and no one's talking about the same thing. They all think they're talking about the same thing, but then when you ask them, they're not. So, for instance, when are we in the same atmosphere? Are you and I in the same atmosphere right now? Which atmosphere are we in? Is there an atmosphere all the time? Or is it a special thing and some things only qualify as an atmosphere? Suppose we're in the same building. How much of the atmosphere is the product of me, and how much of it is the product of the building? You might think that we enact an atmosphere that is co-created. Okay, but what is it that we co-create? So I'm completely at a loss on two separate occasions. I might enter the same atmosphere. I might enter different atmospheres in the same place. If I'm busy in my head, is it the same atmosphere? If I'm busy playing chess, is it the same atmosphere? And is there even, I don't know how big even an atmosphere is. How many are there in a room? Or how many are there in a building? What is the relationship to the outside, to the inside? So for instance, is there an atmosphere to a beautiful chessboard, a beautifully carved board, when after all, the chessboard has nothing to do with the chess game? The chess game is a pure abstraction. But the beautiful board, maybe it creates an atmosphere for the players. Or a system of lighting. Do we change the atmosphere when we change the lighting? Or sound or acoustics, what role do they play in creating an atmosphere? What about something tiny, say an Indian miniature? It seems to me that we can enter the media space of that Indian miniature, and it creates an atmosphere completely inside it. But then, how complicated is this thing? It's so complicated. So then you say, well, okay, but you know what attunement is. And I say, well, yeah, I've often been interested in the idea of attunement. And sometimes I do know what it is. Suppose I have a radio and I tune the knob so that I reduce the noise and I pick up more signal. So I'm reducing the signal to noise ratio so that I'm getting more and more signal. And when it's minimized, I've got it right, a clear signal. So now you say, oh, you're attuned when you pick up the real signal. But then whatever happened to the inactive side of atmosphere that I co-create? It can't be like attuning that, because that is a very realistic notion, as if it's completely signal out there and noise out there, and what I have to do is hone in on it. So their sort of motivation, it's a good goad to have people keep thinking, you haven't got the deep part yet, you haven't got the deep part yet. But when the day comes and people have a greater clarity on it, you will not see the concepts of atmosphere and attunement. You will see a much more detailed account of what these things are, it seems to me.
Okay. So for you, we are not ready yet to talk about attunement or atmospheres.
You can talk all you want. If you're asking me if there's a place in science for it yet, certainly not in those terms. Or you can define it. You can do anything with terms. You can define it. And flexibility. What does flexibility mean? But you can begin to define it with respect to So you can define terms, and good for you, because that's the first step in doing any science.
You say there are times when we literally think with things, because external objects often play a significant role in cognitive processes. The mind and environment behave as a coupled system, a cognitive system that extends beyond the body. This sounds exactly like Andy Clark and David Chalmers' theory of the extended mind. Do you accept their view? Do you have any criticism of their position?
Well, I think it's wonderful that they advanced the theory, and it's certainly hit the world in a way that everybody was waiting for something like this, in part because of the web, although it was a little early for the web, but everybody, they were ready for this, and it was a very philosophical idea too. Now, to me, the easiest idea of extended mind, and I think the clearest too, is to say that the mind is extended when we create cognitive circuits that reach into the world. Now, Paul Maglio and I, we talked about things. We didn't use the phrase cognitive circuits.
Pardon, who?
Paul Maglio. He was a graduate student of mine, and my first doctoral student, and he was really excellent. And together we studied Tetris. In Tetris, we then culminated in a paper called Distinguishing Epistemic and Pragmatic Actions, I think. And there we talked about how you manipulate the Tetris piece very quickly, not for the sake of getting the piece into a position which allowed you to get points, but sometimes you manipulated the piece in order to make a determination about what the piece was or where it should go, even if you moved it too far. So we distinguished these kinds of actions from the purely pragmatic or goal-oriented actions of getting points. And the point was, these actions are so fast that you're actually doing outside something faster than you can do it inside. Because to rotate a Tetris piece mentally takes, 150 to 350 or 400 milliseconds. And to rotate a Tetris piece with your finger, you can do it between 80 and 110 milliseconds, depending upon your twitch rate. So you could actually rotate the piece and perceive it faster than you could mentally image the piece. And so people develop strategies that they rely on doing this thing outside to change their internal state. So that's a case of a cognitive circuit. And we made a diagram of how this works, looping out into the world and coming back. And I think that Andy used a very felicitous term, cognitive circuit, to characterize that. So that I understand. It's high speed, it's closely coupled, it's extending cognition in ways that you can't really do without that. It's just faster, it's more reliable. There's lots of things you can do by coupling up, by getting tightly connected with the outside and manipulating the outside. You can increase your own cognitive capacities. Okay.
This has anything to do with the kid with doing the mental abacus in a video that you were explaining, or has nothing to do?
Yes.
Where he's
No, it
putting hands,
does.
like he's
Uh,
pointing.
you want me to try to find that?
No, I have it. I mean, I saw it. Yeah, you could.
Okay, so you could put it in. You could put it in. Okay. Do you want to come back and just why don't you say that again? Does this have something to do with it? Is the example of mental abacus an example of
Yes,
this? You know.
yes. I want to know if this is related to what you were saying, like we project. So he was moving his hands while he was counting, and it was so fast that he couldn't write, he couldn't talk, sorry, he could only write.
Right. So in the case of mental abacus, which is something that is a competition throughout Asia in particular, the thing about an abacus is it's an external instrument, and you can encode numbers up to a certain size in an abacus, the position of the little the tiles, the little beads in an abacus. And so what they do is they learn the numbers by the position on the abacus. So instead of saying 6,545 or write 6,545, they manipulate the beads, and that says 6,545. So they're using a visual representation for numbers that is different than either an auditory representation in phonemic space or a written representation of numbers. Okay, we can understand this. The thing is, the abacus is set up so that they can manipulate these things much faster algorithmically. That is, there's a method of using the abacus that's faster than multiplication, long multiplication, or doing it in your head in some other way. And so what they do is they are asked to multiply two 6 or 7-digit numbers, huge numbers, which would even take a long time to just say them. And then they do them very quickly, and they go like this with their hands as if they are mentally imagining, and their hand is helping them to manipulate the beads. So that's a case of sort of this looping where the hand, like the dancer, Noah, he was imagining that stuff, and it was helping him dance. In this case, they're imagining with their hands manipulating the beads, and they then calculate super fast. So yeah, when they use the beads, they are using it. That's a case of a cognitive circuit into a tool. It's extended cognition. And when they use their fingers, they're using, again, they're facilitating the performance of this mental state connected and so it's extended cognition because they're using their body as a help, an aid to move their head faster. But it's complicated, but I think it's really interesting. And so I think that those are cases where, because they're very tightly coupled in time, but that they are cases of examples of extended cognition. But when you look at Otto's notebook, the man who has some cognitive deficits, he's got mild cognitive impairment, and so the result is that he can't remember things very, very well, and he's developed a strategy of using a notebook to write things down all the time. Now, that notebook is going to get pretty thick, and if you ask him something, he better know how to find the page that's relevant before he forgets. And so he's going to have a thick notebook, and he has to move through the whole notebook and find it, and then he has to read it off and then understand it. It's a very slow process compared to any of these fast processes. So I don't think his use of the notebook is really a case of a cognitive circuit. It's too slow. It's distributed cognition. Yes, they are getting distributed capacity by using external artifacts.
To storage information.
Please?
It's used to storage some information.
That's right. There is a kind of external storage there, but the notebook is both slow and error prone. So it doesn't look like memory encoding. The way you put it out there and have to find a place and everything, it doesn't look like the way our memories work. And memory retrieval, it's not at all like that. So what you have is this world skill. And that's why I would say it's distributed cognition rather than extended mind. But, people are allowed to define things the way they want to, and it's been very successful. I personally think that the serious question of extended mind is one that will come up for real in cases of law. So if I have an extended mind and I'm relying on, say, my notebook as part of my mind, in every functional sense, the way part of my brain behaves as part of my mind, then if you were to damage something to my brain, somebody who did that, they would be guilty of injury and assault and battery and a whole set of criminal actions. On the other hand, if someone stole my glasses or they stole the notebook, if you thought the notebook was just like a part of my brain, that should be assault and battery. That should be a criminal act and not theft, but a criminal act of assault because they have assaulted my person. But I think the lawyers and the judges and culture will have to decide whether that is going to count, what kind of law has been broken. And so there will be scientists and there will be lawyers and there will be judges working out policy that decides when something is part of your mind and not part of your mind. And it's for them to decide. We scientists have a smaller role, but I think when it comes to these tightly coupled things, yeah, then they are part of your mind. And I guess if I'm in the middle of writing something and someone stops the process, that is an assault. So I would hold to that position.
Okay. I mean, yes, I mean you are right with this. I think if you have a computer or a phone, it becomes part of your brain because it helps you to be faster, to storage
Well,
stuff.
yeah, but if you steal somebody's iPhone, you don't accuse them of assault and battery. You accuse them of theft or vandalism or something. It's a different kind of case. It's not harming your body. It's not harming your person.
But you are
And the
right. I mean,
person,
it should be. Um,
well, you think you're right. I don't think so. I think it's not harming your person. But if you're in the midst of it, anyway, it's a delicate matter, and people will disagree. And certainly, I think Andy and probably David agree that in the end, this is going to be an ethical decision. Exactly what counts, an ethical and legal decision as to what counts as part of your mind.
Thank you for this beautiful interview. Will you like to add something for architects or designers to follow up, to read, or just to wait for your article to come out? What
Uh,
I mean,
well,
any
I
advice?
have an article that might be of interest to architects.
Really?
Um,
Okay.
Yes, I do. I worked very hard when I was at the Bartlett to produce an article, and it was on the difference. It's a theory of interactivity, of interaction in buildings, and I was really trying to understand what it is what is an interface in buildings, and what is it to interact? Because we always interact through an interface.
Yeah.
Now, in the digital world, interaction hits a digital physical boundary, and then there's the physical side. So this is one side, and interaction allows us to get to the other side, but a very tight definition in here. But in a building, what's the interface? It's clearly three-dimensional. So it's hard to think of what the interface is. I asked Alan Penn, at the time, the head of the 5 schools at the Bartlett, and he said, "Oh well, if the door is open in the office, it's one interface, and if the door is closed, it's a different interface. And he means, of course, the social interface. And I thought about this and I thought about this, and it was so confusing. I thought about it for a month. And then finally, I started to understand something. And I believe that there are three conceptions of interactivity. There's the push me, pull you idea, that is standard causal interaction and Newtonian interaction and stuff. And then there is network interaction with peripheral computing and all those stuff. And there it's much more complicated, but I think we can specify it. And then there is this other thing, and it's a socio-ecological interaction. And I think as we begin to understand, the key thing is that in social interaction, a person can change themselves through interaction. Whereas if I'm interacting with a computer, I only change myself, or interacting with a mirror, I only change myself from the other side when it comes back to me. The very act of doing it does not change me. I change something on the other side changes, and then I change. Like in a mirror, I go like this. And so that it's different, however, when I scratch my head. I'm interacting with myself and I'm changing myself in the very case. So social interaction is very special. And I believe that as we get clearer about that, we will understand more about the nature of interaction. And it's not a small paper, but I was very careful in walking through these different conceptions of interaction. And I think I made progress. It was important for me. And I think, architects would find at least the first 8 pages interesting on sort of what the difference is between architecture and HCI. I think they would find that difference. Anyway, it's in Transactions of Human-Computer Interaction, TOCI, Transactions of Computer-Human Interaction.
I will write it down under the videos. We can.
Yeah, that's great. There are other ones too, but that's plenty.
I mean, you can share with us everything. We are
everything.
Really everything you have, so we can extend our mind a little bit more. Thank you.
It's sad to say there's not that much anyway. So.
No, you're fantastic. We are really happy to have you here, and
it's been a real pleasure.